Welcome back. We will now look at the next session, which is going to be basically a HTTP to SOAP scenario. What do we mean by an HTTP to SOAP scenario? The sender adapter that we are going to use now is going to be a HTTP adapter, whereas the receiver adapter that we are going to use is going to be a SOAP adapter. So what do we mean in this? What are we going to do in this scenario is PI is going to get a request from a HTTP client. Once PI receives the request, PI is going to make a web service call to an external web service using a SOAP receiver adapter, and once PI gets this the response back, it is going to send it back to the HTTP. So again, like we did in the previous session, which was a SOAP to RFC scenario, this scenario is also going to be a synchronous scenario. With this, let's get into the details of this. So what are the steps that we are going to follow here, right? The first thing that we are going to do is the web service that we are going to call. This web service is going to be a currency conversion web service. So it's going to take two inputs, a source currency and a target currency, and using those inputs, it's going to get a response back. So this is a publicly available currency conversion web service on the internet. So we're going to use this service. So let's see how do we do that, right? I'm going to go into my browser and I'm going to search for web service X currency converter. So this is among the most famous web services available on the internet. So if you would like to take a note of the URL is also available in the presentation that I'm sharing. It's webservicex.net currencyconverter.asmx, right? Or you can do a Google and you will lead to this particular currency converter web service. So let's go into this. Okay, now once if you see this is a free web service, let's go ahead, take this web service, WSDL. Remember, WSDL is nothing but a web services description language. A web services description language, or WSDL, will contains couple of important information. It contains the request message structure, the response message structure, and the URL that the call has to be made. Okay, so I'm copying this WSDL URL and this is the exact URL that you see here. Oops, let's go back to the presentation. Something is wrong. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so before we look into that, what we will be doing is we will be downloading this WSDL. Once we do that, we will test this web service in SOAP UI. So we are not going to use PI in the first step. We are going to test this web service independently to see how it works. So then we know what are the corresponding request structures to be built, what are the corresponding response structures to be built. Okay, what we will then do is we will download the WSDL from this website. Once we download the WSDL, we will load the WSDL in the PI ESR, Enterprise Service Repository. We will define an outbound HTTP service interface. We will also define the data type and the message type for the outbound structure. We will define an inbound SOAP service interface, and then we will see if we need to use a data type or a message type here. In this case, we will not be for the inbound because it's a SOAP call. We will be using the WSDL as the request and the response structure. Once we've done that, we will be configuring our interface in the integration directory, and once we have configured the interface, basically we will create a sender HTTP adapter, a receiver HTTP, a sender HTTP adapter, a receiver SOAP adapter, and then we'll create a sender agreement, a receiver determination, an interface determination, and a receiver agreement. Once you've done with all of these configurations, we will then download a test client, because like in the previous exercise, when we were building our SOAP to RFC scenario, we use SOAP UI as the testing client to trigger the SOAP call. In this case, we need to use a HTTP test client, and we are going to download it from this SAP Service Marketplace, SAP Community Network, SDN or SAN. We will be using this blog, and we will be downloading the data there. And once we have done that, we are going to test our scenario. Okay, so with that, let's get started. Let's get started. What I'm going to do is going to copy this URL. Oops. Copy this URL and go to my SOAP UI. Okay, so now I'm within my SOAP UI, and now I'm going to create a new SOAP project. and I'm going to call the SOAP project as currency converter, and in the WSDL I'm going to give my WSDL file. Okay, so now I've given my WSDL URL and I'm saying create sample request for all operations and saying OK. Okay, there seems to be some problem with the URL, so let's try the URL in my browser. Right, I think in my copy paste there's been some problem. Okay, so this is all right. So let's cancel this and I right click on the project, and I can always add a WSDL here. Let's just see if it is okay. Yeah, there was an extra space at the end, and now this should be okay. Let's go ahead and say OK. Alright, something seems to be wrong. The system cannot find the path possible. Okay, I think the problem is clear. I need to go in here and I need to provide http://. Okay, so basically the challenge was that in the URL that I had provided, the http:// was missing. Now I've added that, and once we add that, I think this should work. So let's go ahead and add the WSDL. Yes, now you see it's what SOAP UI is doing is it is connecting to the target system to the web service, and it's downloading this. So forget the SOAP 1.2. PI at this point only supports SOAP 1.0, so we are just going to focus on SOAP 1.0. So go to currency converter SOAP conversion rate request 1. Okay, and double click the request, and now I'm going to go into USD. I'm giving a SOAP conversion and I'm saying convert from USD to INR. Okay, convert from US dollars to Indian rupees, and I'm going to say execute. And when I say execute, the web service call is going to be executed and I'm going to get the conversion result. Obviously in this case, if you see, you did not get the conversion result as the exchange rate, you just got a -1. That's absolutely okay. Nothing, we are not really bothered if this web service provides us the accurate currency conversion, right? We just want to make a request using a SOAP protocol and get a response back. Now let's just quickly look at the raw message that went out. This is the XML message and raw message, right? And if you see the raw message that went out, in the raw message in the HTTP header, there's something called as a SOAP action. So this is very important, and we will be using the SOAP action when we are configuring our SOAP adapter. So this is the SOAP URL. So this is the URL to which the call was made, and then this is the SOAP action. So with this, now let's go ahead to what the next step is. So whenever the PI is making a call so we've tested this web service in SOAP UI. Whenever PI is going to make a call to a web service, the first thing that you need is what we call as a WSDL file, right? So let's go ahead and download this WSDL file, right? So I'm going to try to open this URL in Internet Explorer. It's a little better in Internet Explorer. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to close this. And I'm going to close this. And I'm going to go into a new tab. Copy my URL. Copy my WSDL URL. Control C. I'm going to go into my browser and launch this URL. Control V, enter. Okay, now that I have my URL entered, PI is now going to get me this WSDL. Let's just give it a second. It seems to be taking time to load. Okay, so now that we have this, we have to save this WSDL, and the way to do that is go to Alt F and save as. Okay, go to Alt F, file, save as. When you do that, it's going to say, hey, where do I save it? Give the location. So in my case, I'm going to desktop, I'm going to training, and I'm saying currency converter .wsdl. Okay, make sure you name the file as currency converter .wsdl. Okay, so how do I save it? I launch this, and then you say Alt F, go to save as, and give the name of the file. Okay, it might say XML, give the folder. In our case, we are going to save it as a WSDL file. Okay, now that we've done with that, let's go ahead and start up a PI development. So I'm going to go into my enterprise service repository, and the first thing that I'm going to do is, as always, like whenever we build a new scenario, we're going to define a, what do we define? We define a namespace. You guessed it right if you are guessing the answer with me. So you're going to define a namespace. So I right click, I go into my namespace, make sure you're on the work areas, namespace here, and let's go ahead and give a namespace. I'm going to call it training.com. HTTP to RFC _00. All right, I've called it HTTP to, oops, is it HTTP to RFC? Sorry, I'm too used to RFCs. HTTP to SOAP 00. So let's go ahead and say create, and I'm going to give a description, and I say namespace for HTTP to SOAP scenario, and I'm saving my namespace. Excellent. So my namespace has been created. Oops. My namespace has been created. So the first thing that now we will be doing is importing this WSDL. So how do I import the WSDL? Watch this carefully. Right click, new. Now you need to go into interface objects. Previously we would say data type, message type, service interface. Now you're going to use what we call as an external definition. Okay, make sure you selected external definition. Once you've selected external definition, give a name. I'm going to call it ED underscore currency converter underscore WSDL. Okay, I've called it external definition currency converter underscore WSDL, and I say create. So make sure you're in interface objects, external definition. You can see external definition here. Give ED to stand for external definition, give the name, and what is the type of this external definition. This type is going to be a web services description language, or WSDL. Okay, now that the screen is visible, you see the category here, you see WSDL, XSD, DTDs. So what it means is, so far we've always been using a data type and a message type, but it is not always necessary that in a real world project you create a data type and a message type manually. Your third party systems can come to you and say, hey, you need to send a message to me in this format, and here is an XSD. Because PI only deals with XMLs, XML structures can be defined as an external definition called XSD, external schema definition, or as a DTD called document type definition. So these are standard languages with which you can define XML structures. So you need not always use WSDL, you can always use XSDs and DTDs as well. So in this case, because we are dealing with a web service will always provide you with a WSDL. So make sure you select WSDL or web service description language, and click on this button that says import external definition. Okay, now when I click on this button, it's going to ask you the location of your WSDL on your local machine. So I'm selecting this, and now I'm going to make sure I'm selecting the currency converter WSDL. Right, the currency converter WSDL is the WSDL that we just imported from the external website, or downloaded it from the browser. Make sure you select currency converter WSDL and say open. Okay, once you do that, just go into the messages tab, and you should see some messages out here. As long as these messages are visible, everything's okay, and you've imported the WSDL perfectly. So now just go ahead and click on save. All right, I'm done. My external definition, or my WSDL, has been imported as an external definition. Now I'm going to go ahead, create a data type for my HTTP structure. So I'm going to again have, I'm going here, saying going to interface objects, go to data type, and say DT underscore HTTP to SOAP underscore request. Why do we need request and response? Because it's a synchronous scenario. We need two data types, one for the request and one for the response. So I've called the data type as request underscore 00. All right, and now that I have this, Okay, my request structure, I'm doing a currency conversion, right? So I need a from currency and a to currency. So I'm going to insert a sub element. I'm just going ahead and inserting two sub elements. Oops, sorry, I did a mistake here, so I'm going to just delete all this. Okay, insert sub element, say from currency, type, cancel. What is the type going to be? Guessed it right, it has to be XSD string. XSD types, and select XSD string. Next, select insert element, to currency, again in the drop down here, select this drop down, say the XSD type as, select the XSD type and make it as XSD string. With this, our data type is created. Now that our source data type is defined, let's go ahead and create a target data type. So right click, new, call the dt underscore http to SOAP request. Instead of request, now we are going to call it as response. So I'm going to just make the name as res, oops, and I'm saying create. Okay, so this is just going to have one field. This data type is just going to have one field, and that is going to be called as the conversion rate, because all we're going to get is a response that's going to have the conversion rate. So I'm going to create that. Let's just say rate, right? Let's just call it rate. I've called it rate, and I'm going to create the type as XSD type string. Okay, so XSD types, select XSD types and make it XSD string and save your data type. So now we've created a request data type and a response data type. What is the next step that we typically do? If we are defining a data type, we will be creating a message type. So we are going to create two message types. So make sure you're in right click, new, interface objects, message type, empty underscore http to SOAP underscore request underscore 00. That's the name of my message type that I'm going to be creating. So I'm giving the name of my message type and clicking on create, and now I'm going to just select my data type, drag my data type, make sure that the black box is here on the hand sign, and with that my message type is created. Okay, once your message type is created, save your message type. My request message type is created. Now I need to create my response message type. So right click on your message type, say new, make sure you're in interface objects, message types, empty underscore http to SOAP underscore res underscore 00. This stands for your response message type. So click on create, and it's going to ask you what is the corresponding data type for your message type. Select your response data type, drag it to your hand symbol here, and then drop it. With that, our response data type is also created, message type is also created. Okay, now we are going to create service interfaces. How many service interfaces? Two service interfaces are required, one for the HTTP and one for the SOAP. So I say SI OS. Why do we call it OS? Because it's outbound synchronous. HTTP to SOAP underscore 00. oops, that's a spelling mistake. So I'm going to say HTTP SIOS HTTP to source underscore 00. What does SIOS stand for? Service Interface Outbound Synchronous, right? So this is my service interface. The category is outbound. The mode has to be changed from asynchronous to synchronous. And why is it synchronous? Because it is a request response scenario where you're going to send in a request and you're going to get a response back. So now that you have your service interface created, select your service interface, select your source message type, and drag it and drop it into your, oops, sorry, I double click my message type, which means my message type is open. Okay, so select your message type, and once you select your message type, drag it and drop it into your request structure. Make sure that the black box is out there. Then same way for the response, drag your message type and select and drop it here. Okay, with that my request and the response structure is done. Now let's go ahead and define a service interface for the SOAP, right? So I'm going to say inbound synchronous HTTP to SOAP underscore 00. Okay, and I say create. This is the category is going to change from outbound to inbound because it's an inbound, and the mode is going to change from asynchronous to synchronous. Now you have your request message type and the response message type. What will we be doing? Are we going to use the data type? No, this data type was for your HTTP. For the SOAP, you need to use the WSDL, and that's why what we need to do is drag your external definition here and move it here, right? Drag the external definition that we imported. I'm going to repeat it. Okay, I'm selecting my external definition, I'm dragging my external definition such that the black box comes up, right? And once the black box, oops, let me do that one more time, it's a little slow out here. Okay, now I'm selecting it and I'm dropping it. Perfect. Now it's saying, hey, select the external message. So this web service provides multiple external messages. Because we are making a SOAP call, you're going to say conversion rate SOAP in. Okay, you're going to be making a SOAP call, so make sure you select conversion rate SOAP in, and in stands for input message and out stands for the output message. So say apply, select conversion rate SOAP in and click say apply, right? Same way now for the response message, drag and drop and select conversion rate SOAP out, because the out stands for the output message or the response message, and click apply and you're done. So that's it. You've defined an outbound service interface and you now define an inbound service interface. Make sure it's inbound synchronous, and the inbound service interface, because it is going to be used by a SOAP adapter, has to use your external message, that is the WSDL that you generated. Let's save our service interface, and the next step is going to be defining what do we typically do after we define our service interfaces? We define our message mappings and we define our operation mapping. So right click and say new. So let's go ahead, select mapping objects, message mapping, and give the name of our message mapping. It's going to be SOAP, it's going to be HTTP underscore HTTP to SOAP underscore 00, right? Let's create a message mapping with that name. What is this correct? Would we typically use this naming convention? The answer is no. The reason being, your message mapping should have the name request mapping and response mapping. In this case, we are going to have two mappings. One is the request mapping and the response mapping, and that's why we need to probably change the name of the mapping. So that's why I am now changing it again. I'm going into mapping objects, underscore HTTP to SOAP underscore request underscore 00. Okay, perfect. So let's create this message mapping. I'm going to now select my message type. This is my request message type. I drag this here into my source message. What about the target message type? The target is now going to be mapped to my SOAP request, exactly, right? And the SOAP request is going to come in from the external definition. So make sure you're taking the external definition and dragging it into the target message. And when you drag it into the target message, it's going to select which external message do you want. Select the conversion rate SOAP in, right? So conversion rate SOAP in. So the request, HTTP request is now going to get mapped to the HTTP to the SOAP request. So drag the from currency to the to currency, from currency to from currency, and drag the to currency to currency. And with that, your mapping is done. It's very straightforward mapping. Your from currency is mapped to the from currency, and your to currency is mapped to the to currency. With that, your mapping is done, and you save your mapping. Okay. Let's go ahead, go into the test tab and test our mapping. I'm saying from currency as USD, to currency as INR, and I'm going to execute my mapping. Once I execute my mapping, out here we should see, hey, the mapping got executed. And once the mapping got executed, this is the response structure. Okay. So this is the request structure that is going to make the call to the SOAP. Let's just copy this XML. We are going to use this XML for our testing. So let's just copy this XML, Control A. So go into the source tab and then copy the XML and put it into a notepad. So I'm just copying the request structure XML, putting it into a notepad, and I'm just going to save it as HTTP to SOAP request message. So that way I'll have it handy in my training folder on my desktop. So I'm going to say HTTP to SOAP underscore request dot XML. Okay. All right. Let this be open. Let's go ahead, define the next mapping. This is going to be our response mapping, right? So you'll call it mm underscore HTTP to SOAP underscore res underscore 00. And this is our response mapping. So I've created my response mapping. And now in the response mapping, what is the source message going to be? Is it going to be my message type or the external definition? It is going to be the external definition because the response is coming from your SOAP and you need to map it to your target structure. So drag your external definition, select conversion rate SOAP out. Make sure you select conversion rate SOAP out, and once you've selected that, wait for the message to load out here. You see the response structure, perfect. And then in the target, I'm going to select my message type, that's HTTP to SOAP response 00, and put it into my target message. Perfect. So now I just need to map this one field, conversion rate result, to my output field called rate, conversion rate, right? I'm just dragging it, dropping it. With that, my response mapping is done, and I'm saving my mapping. Okay. So now that we've defined our message mappings, the next step is to define an operation mapping. So right click, new, and say operation mapping. Give the name of your operation mapping OM HTTP to SOAP underscore 00. Do we have one operation mapping or two operation mappings? It's just going to be one operation mapping, like we did in the RFC to SOAP scenario, just one operation mapping. Select the operation mapping. The operation mapping is based on service interfaces. So my operation mapping is selected. Select the outbound synchronous service interface here and drag it into the source operation. Select your inbound service interface now. And once you select it, drag it into the target operation out here. Okay. Now, when I say read operations, you will see the structure change. It's going to ask for the request mapping and the response mapping, right? So the request mapping is going to be from the message type to the external definition. So let's select this. It will display a message mapping and select the message mapping. Go to the response mapping tab. The response mapping is from the SOAP output to your HTTP response message. Select it and save. Okay. With that, your operation mapping is also created, and save your operation mapping. Now let's go to the change list and activate all our objects. So what are the objects that we created? We defined a namespace definition, and then we imported our external definition, which we imported a WSDL as an external definition. We created two data types, a request data type and a response data type. We created two message type, a request response message type and a response message type. We created two service interface, an outbound synchronous service interface and an inbound synchronous service interface. And because it's an outbound synchronous, the message type, these two message types were used in this service interface, and the inbound service interface was using the external definition. We created two mappings, one for the request and one for the response, and we created one operation mapping. All right, let's go ahead, activate our objects, activate, and the objects should get activated. Let's just wait for the activation to get done. Hopefully there's no issue. Perfect, the change list has gotten activated. Okay. Now let's go ahead and do our configuration in the integration directory. Okay, so what am I going to do first? I'm going to go into my integration directory and create a folder create, and I'm going to call it http to SOAP 00. Now out here I'm going to create a new communication channel. So now what's going to be my sender business communication component? I'm going to use the same bs underscore file system underscore 00 and create the communication channel under and call it cc http to SOAP underscore sender underscore 00. Okay, call it cc http to SOAP underscore http underscore sender underscore 00. Why http? Because it is a http sender channel. In the adapter type, select http underscore AAE. Make sure you select http underscore AAE. If you are on PI 7.1 or PI 7.11, you will not see http underscore AAE, and in that case you can select http. But now in PI 7.3 onwards, because your HTTP adapter is also available on the adapter engine, make sure you select http underscore AAE. Remember, if you remember the first day session or the first session that we did on the components of your PI, we told, hey, HTTP adapter runs on both the ABAP stack and on the Java stack. If you are on PI 7.1 or lesser, you would use HTTP because it used to run on the ABAP stack. But now that we are on a PI 7.4 server, we can just go ahead and select it as http underscore AAE. Alright, so I'm just selecting that. Is it a sender adapter? Yes. All the options can be default. Don't do anything, just save this sender channel. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a new receiver communication channel. Now let's do this under BC underscore file system underscore 00. What is BC? BC is nothing but the business component. So a business component is something that we define in this is the business component. We did in the first scenario, file to file scenario. Now we are going to use this and we are going to create our communication channel under this. This is going to act as our receiver channel. So I'm going to call it cc http to SOAP underscore receiver underscore 00. Okay, cc http to SOAP underscore receiver 00. In the adapter type, select the adapter type to be SOAP, right? Make sure you select the adapter type as SOAP. Change the adapter type direction as receiver. Perfect. Now it is asking me for two parameters, target URL and SOAP action, right? So what is the target URL? Let's go back to SOAP UI, and this was the URL to which the web service made the call. So copy the URL from SOAP UI and put it here. Okay, so go to SOAP UI and go to copy the SOAP URL and put it here. What about the SOAP action? The SOAP action, go to the raw message and see if there's a SOAP action. Here in the raw you see SOAP action : equal to, just get the SOAP action without the double quotes. If you see there's a double quote here, you need not give the double quote. Just take the SOAP action and put it here. Alright, the SOAP URL and the SOAP action. SOAP URL and the SOAP action, and save this message. Okay, with that If there is a username password, you can provide a username password. If there's a proxy, let's say your PI server is not connected to the internet directly, there's a proxy server, you can give the proxy details, and here you can give the proxy authentication. In our case, our PI server has direct access to the internet. If you're dealing with SOAP attachments, you can select SOAP attachments and so on. Okay, so just give the URL, give the SOAP action, and now that you're done, you have created 2 communication channels. What's the next step? Is to create a sender agreement. Exactly. So let's go ahead. BS file system 00 is my sender communication component, and my sender interface is going to be SIOS HTTP to SOAP 00. Okay, let's go ahead and say apply, and once I've told apply, I say create. It's now going to ask you for the sender communication channel in the sender agreement. What is my sender communication channel? It's a HTTP to SOAP scenario, and HTTP sender channel is my sender channel. So select that and say apply and say save. So my sender agreement has been created. What's the next step? You create a, what do we create? We create a receiver determination. So where do we create the receiver determination? Go to configuration objects and select the receiver determination. Who's my sender system? It's BS file system 00, and then the interface is going to be SIOS HTTP to SOAP. Select that sender interface and then say create. Right? Perfect. Now what is my receiver component? Remember, my communication channel was created under the receiver component BC file system 00. So go here, type BC file system underscore 00 and use the selection help and make sure your business component is available here. So with that, your receiver determination is created and saved. Now before we proceed, what is the difference between a business system and a business component? A business system is created in the SLD, whereas a business component was created directly in the integration directory in the first scenario, in the file to file scenario, right? Now I'm double clicking this, and remember, we need to add the interfaces manually to your business component, right? So in the case of a business system, if I go into my sender and receiver, I will be seeing all my interfaces listed here from my software component. But in the business component, you do not see that. So in the business component, you need to manually go in and add your service interface out here, right? So what is the name of my inbound service interface? It's SIOS HTTP to SOAP, and then just use the selection help, right? And it is going to show my service interface, and you add the service interface manually. If you remember, we did this in the file to file scenario, and this is the next time we're using the business component. So just add the business component out here. Okay, now you save it, you close the business component. Let's go back to the receiver determination. Now you go into configuration overview, drag this, and now you see, you haven't defined the interface determination. So let's go ahead and define the interface determination. Right click on interface determination, say new specific, and when you do that, it's going to ask you for the operation mapping. Select your operation mapping, OM HTTP to SOAP, and that's about it. So your operation mapping and your inbound interface is listed. Save your interface determination. Now once you save your interface determination, go back to your receiver determination and refresh. In the configuration overview, refresh, and when you refresh it, you should still see it in red because your receiver agreement is not defined. Right click on your receiver agreement and say new specific, and when you say new specific, it's going to ask for the receiver communication channel. So select the receiver communication channel, and which is the receiver communication channel? This is a HTTP to SOAP scenario, so make sure you select your receiver SOAP adapter and say apply. Okay, now that you've done apply, you save your receiver agreement, and once you've saved your receiver agreement, you go back to your receiver determination and refresh by clicking on the configuration overview, refresh, expand it. This should no more be in red. All the objects have been created. With this, your scenarios configuration is done. Right click and on your change list and activate it. Okay, so what were the list of objects that we created? You created a sender communication channel of type HTTP. You created a receiver communication channel of type SOAP. The receiver communication channel was created under your business component, and you went into your business component and you added the receiver interface, and then you created all your 4 objects: receiver determination, interface determination, sender agreement, and receiver agreement. Okay, with this, let's go ahead and activate our change list. And now that your activation is done, you are ready to test the scenario. So let's go ahead and test the scenario. And how to test the scenario? To test the scenario, we were going to download the HTTP test client from this SDN blog. So this is the blog, this is the URL. So I'm going to go into the URL here. Okay. I'm going to go to my browser and hit this URL. Okay. You can always go do a search in Google as well, but then for now, let's just use this URL. So this is the URL that is available here, and now in this URL, I'm going to go in. If you go to this blog, this is a blog saying PI 7.3 Java adapter test tool. Here you will see a section that says HTML code which can be copy pasted into a file with extension .html, and this is the HTML code. So just start from the HTML code here, keep going all the way to the bottom, just go to the end of this HTML. So what you need to do, make sure you're selecting HTML code from here. The HTML to /HTML code here needs to be copied. So do a Control C, go into Notepad and paste the file. Make sure that only thing that you have selected is all the cut data within the HTML and /HTML tag. So I have /HTML here, and if I go all the way up, I have HTML here. Save this file. I'm going to go into my training. I'm going to call it http client.html. Right? Make sure it has an extension .html. Why? Because you're going to open it in a browser. Because it is a HTTP test tool, you need to open it in a browser and test it with a browser. So call it http client and .html. Okay. To repeat, what did we do? We went to this URL. Once we went into the URL, copy all the content that is out here within the HTML tags and save it into a notepad and save it as a .html file. So now if I go into my .html file here, http client.html, open it with Internet Explorer. So right click, open with Internet Explorer, and now when I open it with Internet Explorer, it might ask you, hey, this browser is using ActiveX Control. Do you want to enable it? Make sure you enable ActiveX Control. At times in your browser, ActiveX Control might not be enabled, so make sure you enable ActiveX Controls. Okay. So first thing, it's asking for the server host name, right? So what is the server host name? That's the PI host name. So I'm going to copy the host name from my PI browser. Okay. And I'm putting the host name here. The port, if you look at the port here, it's 57,000. So go ahead and select 57,000 here. Then next it's asking for a sender service. So what is my sender service? My sender service is, if I go here in my receiver determination, this is my sender service, BS file system 00, copy that, put it here. Quality of service is best effort. Sender interface, my sender interface is this, SIO is HTTP to SOAP, so I give my sender interface. Next it asks me for a sender namespace, interface namespace or sender namespace, give that. So you give the server host, you give the server port, you give the sender service, give the quality of service as best effort, give the sender interface name, give the sender interface namespace, and then it asks you for the XML. Remember we copied the data into an XML file, into a notepad when we were testing the message mapping. Get that XML and put it out here. There are two ways. You can either do it here or you can select upload file, browse. I had saved the file here as HTTP to SOAP request XML, or you can also browse. You might get this error, say yes, it's okay. Okay, so let's just go ahead for now with type in XML. Alright, once I say type in XML, I can always click, once I've given all these details, I'm going to click on send. It's going to ask me for the username, so I'm going to give my username, user PI 15, PI @32. Give my username, and once I give my username, I'm going to execute my request. Perfect. Now I executed it, and what's come up here? This is the response, exactly what we wanted, conversion rate. And like I told, the actual rate does not matter, but we got it as -1, but the web service call was done and we got the response back. So how do we monitor this in PI? I'm going to go back to PI. I'm going to go to SXMB_Moni. Once I go into SXMB_Moni, I'm going to say monitor for processed XML messages and execute. And perfect, this is the SOAP to request call that happened. This was my request message and this is my response message. The sending system is BS file system 00 and the receiver component is BC file system 00. So let's double click it, right? Yes. Hello. Okay, so let's first look at the input payload. So this was my input payload. I say right click and say display content in document 1. I say display. Then I go to, how do I see the output of my mapping? I go into technical routing, payloads, main document, right click, say display content in window 2. Right, so here we had the request having message type SOAP request 00, whereas here we have conversion rate from currency and to currency. And then I go into response message. I now go into my response message by double clicking my response message here. This is I go into the input payload, message, right click, display contents in window 1, and this is the response that came back from my web service and then I go into, I can always go into the output channel response. In the case of response, I need to go here, XML validation, and you see here the conversion rate result now became rate because my output response mapping got executed. Okay, so with this, what we have done is we've triggered a call from my HTTP client. I triggered a call from my HTTP client and I got a response back. What you need to do here is, very importantly, copy this URL that you see here and let's examine this in the notepad. Okay, I'm going to format and word wrap. So this is the HTTP URL to which the call has been made. So in the case where you want to give it to your partners, you need to give this URL to your partners. This is nothing but your HTTP URL. It contains the interface namespace, it contains the interface name, and it contains the sender service and what is the quality of service. Okay, there could be cases where your partner is going to say, hey, what is the URL to which I need to send this message? So get it from your SOAP UI. The easiest way is to get it from your HTTP client. Here you see the result and the URL. Get this URL and share it with your partner. Now let's make one more call. Instead of USD, I'm going to say GBP, Great Britain Pound, to USD, right? And I'm going to say execute again. Okay, and again the response came back successfully. Now let's go into Moni, SXMB_Moni, and refresh. We should see two more messages, one for the request and one for the response, and say yes, display, and here we see Great Britain Pound to USD. Okay, what about communication channel monitoring? Let's have a look at our communication channels. So I'm going to configuration and monitoring. Okay, go into adapter engine, and now that you go into adapter engine, go to communication channel monitor, and out here we can go ahead and select our communication channel. So I'm going to go ahead, select my SOAP adapter, and in my SOAP adapter I can select here and I should be able to see the request and the response coming back. Okay, with this we come to the end of the session where we had done a SOAP to a HTTP to SOAP scenario. To summarize, what did we do? We first downloaded a free web service called Currency Conversion Web Service. We downloaded the WSDL from this browser. We tested it in SOAP UI. We downloaded the WSDL to our Internet Explorer, saved the WSDL file. Then we loaded it into the PI Enterprise Service Repository. We defined an outbound service interface. We defined an inbound service interface. The outbound service interface used a custom data type and a custom message type. Our inbound service interface used the external definition, and then we downloaded the HTTP test client from SDN, and we used that HTTP test client to test our scenario. Okay, just on the system, a summary on the system. I defined a namespace called HTTP to SOAP. I imported the external definition, and the external definition will have category as type WSDL. I defined two data types, one from the first data type having from currency and to currency, and the second data type for the response having the conversion rate. I define two message type, one for the request, one for the response. I define one service interface, that's outbound synchronous, and then I define one more service interface, inbound synchronous. The inbound synchronous is going to use the external message that we imported. We define two mappings, one for the request and one for the response, and then one operation mapping that is using the synchronous service interface with the corresponding request and the response mapping. In the integration directory, we defined a sender communication channel. We define, I'll minimize this. We created a sender communication channel of type HTTP_AAE. Make sure it is of type HTTP_AAE. We define a communication channel of type SOAP. The target URL and the SOAP action, we took it from SAP UI. This is the target URL, the URL that you see here, and the SOAP action is this. Make sure the SOAP action doesn't have the double quote, and then you created a sender agreement, a receiver determination, and so on. Okay, with that, and finally we tested our scenario with the HTTP client. We gave the server host, we gave the server port, we gave the sender service, we gave the sender interface and the sender namespace. With that, we come to the end of this session. I shall see you soon in the next session.